I'm now going to hand over to someone with an amazing personal history in philanthropy. We are delighted to have Audette Exel as our second keynote speaker here today. Audette is CEO and founder of the Adara Group, an organisation that believes in using the power of business and partnership to change the lives of people in poverty. Audette will present a deep dive into the cultural value of giving and her experience with giving from both an Australian and a global lens. Over to you, Audette.
Wonderful, Jo. Thank you so much. And so great to be here with Kath and with Good to Give. I'm beaming into you from a cool little town about 3 hours south of Sydney called Mollymook, and it's Ewan country down here. I was really glad to hear the opening talking about paying respect to the knowledge embedded within the Aboriginal custodianship of country to sort of set us off for what is going to be a really exciting afternoon. That feels like such an appropriate way to start this session, because we're going to be discussing the power and the wisdom of elders, and holding on to the beauty and the tradition of that at the same time as embracing innovation and change to make our world a better place. And I want to talk a wee bit about that, and talk about that in the kind of Aussie cultural context. If ever there was a time for us to stand up and rattle the cage and make change, I really believe that's now. I think this may well be the most important decade that we all live through, no matter where in the world we are. And I really believe that every single person, every community, every company, every country, every philanthropist, large or small, has the ability to impact, to influence, and to inspire change on a global scale. Now, I've been doing my best to do that for the last nearly a quarter of a century, and I could tell 1,000 stories about what that looks like. But let me just start with one story, which I think symbolises the point that I want to make as we think about giving. So. Let me tell the story of these three. So through my work at Adara, this year we're going to touch about just short of 200,000 people a year directly. Yet everything that we do and the whole basis that we founded the organisation on is one life at a time. So I thought I'd start with 3 lives, these 3 little E's. This is Marvin, Martin, and Mildred. They're the first 3 set of triplets to ever receive care and survive in the Adara Chiwoko Hospital Neonatal Intensive Care Unit in very remote Uganda. Their mum, her name is Justine, and she found out she was expecting triplets, not twins, at 30 weeks. And she found that out just before she was due to deliver. And as I'm sure many of you know, multiple preterm births can be scary in any part of the world, but even more so in a country like Uganda. Prematurity is actually the leading cause of death for kids below the age of 5 around the world. And in high-income countries, thankfully, most preterm babies survive. But in low-income countries like Uganda, a lack of newborn care puts many preterm babies at risk and puts their mums at risk. So Justine was fortunate to have access to the neonate ICU in this very remote setting that could save her baby's lives. And how amazing is it that that NICU that saved the lives of those 3 little triplets was funded by donors in a land far away, people that she's never going to meet and that they're never going to meet, strangers who step forward to save those kids' lives. That gift from a total stranger across the seas has affected the entire course of that family's lives and all the people connected to them and countless others just like them. So kindness from a stranger in a land far away is just one example, symbolic example for me of the power of good giving. It saves lives. It's the same model of giving that's funded medical research that led to the development of a yellow fever vaccine and led to the clinical use of penicillin. It's the same model of giving that led to almost now effectively eliminating polio. It's the same model of giving that led to Andrew Carnegie opening up 3,000, I think, free lending libraries so people could get a hold of books to read that they otherwise couldn't afford to buy. And it's the same model of giving and philanthropy that saw healthcare made accessible, even to tiny little boys and girls, all the way in remote Uganda. And for me, I believe it's the same model that we need now more than ever to defeat COVID. So if you flick me to the next slide, just want to talk a bit about the global context. Why are we having this conversation right now? Many of you will know some of the data about what's going on in our world, but a couple of simple data points. Up to 124 million people have fallen into extreme poverty in the last 12 months, and 10 million more girls are at the risk of becoming child brides because of the COVID pandemic. And despite the low resource settings being hugely affected by COVID-19, we're watching this terrible pandemic sweep through our project sites in the developing world now. Only 3.1% of people living in those countries have received at least one dose of a vaccine. This is at a time where we in the lucky countries are debating booster shots, and we're debating whether or not our kids over the age of 5 can get a vaccine. Only 3.1% of people in the developing world have access to even one shot. And this is happening to us at exactly the time where most of the recent years have been warmer than any other observed during the 20th century, and where our global mean sea level rise has been 25 centimetres since 1880, and half of that since 1970. So if you've been just reading the headlines from COP26, you can understand how grave that situation is. So the context I want to talk about giving in today and the cultural value of giving is that we're looking at extreme inequality exposed and the dire state of our planet because of global heating. And it's all threatening to undo the progress. There's been huge progress made in tackling poverty towards the SDGs in the last 25 years. Yet here we stand facing these enormous existential threats. So I really believe we need to think about new ways to embed giving into the global system, to innovate new models of giving, and at the same time to stand on the shoulders of the learnings and the example and the gifts of philanthropists who've gone before us to help address inequality. When I think about, I'm a Kiwi, but actually, and just recently a new Australian, as they call us down here, this is a very generous nation. We rank 5th in the World Giving Index, which considers 3 measures of generosity, as you may know: financial, volunteering, and willingness to help a stranger. But on the financial measures of generosity, we're slipping. I really think we need to think very broadly now about philanthropy. Philanthropy, the love of humanity. We need to participate in not just traditional ways of giving, but embrace innovative ways to make change across the whole spectrum of the society that we live in, including with our businesses. I think we can leverage this moment to catalyse progress for communities in need. And there are countless ways we get to cut that cake, I'm happy to say. And I just want to talk about a handful of those and some of the key threads that I would pull out to consider. So if you move me on to the next slide, let me make sure you're in the right place. Nope. Can you move me back to the importance of international giving for a second? That's it. Brilliant. Every day, many of you be like this. I wake up angry on behalf of the poor, and it spurs me on to keep doing more. So I have a real bee in my bonnet. Anybody in Australia would know about the importance of international giving. I talked about the situation and the context. 1.3 billion people in 107 developing countries live in multi-dimensional poverty. So for me, I'm constantly thinking, what's my best use in all of that? I have a lot of people, including great philanthropists, who ask me this question, shouldn't giving begin at home? And my answer to that is very simple, which is, of course it should. My home is the world. Despite the needs of our global neighbours, because so many people are not thinking like that, over the years we've seen these cuts in international aid. Now, this is happening everywhere in the global landscape. So Australia's $4 billion aid spending as a proportion of gross national income is only 0.21%. That's the lowest it's ever been, and it's less than half the proportion it was in the 1970s. And although many wonderful organisations and individuals are giving to international development and development NGOs, giving here also has decreased once you take inflation into account. So per capita giving to NGOs in Australia has decreased from $55 per person in 2005 to $35 per person in 2019. We need to do better than that. Our world is at a tipping point, and the last decade, and unfortunately COVID, I believe, has made us less and less inclined to extend a helping hand to those across our borders, because we're becoming fearful and defensive of those outside of our geographic boundaries. You know, COVID is teaching us to stay away from the stranger. We have to figure out how we can push through that boundary to make change. So if you flick me onto the next slide, which is humanitarian principles, I really want to raise these principles as we think about where we fit in the spectrum of giving. There are 4 key humanitarian principles that underpin global emergency response, which I saw firsthand in practice during the terrible Nepal earthquake in 2015. It was breathtaking to watch UN OCHA and how it worked during that time. Now, these are principles adopted by the UN General Assembly, and if we just put this frame across our giving, I think things would be happening quite differently. So the principles are very simple. They're humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. They're adopted by some of the biggest players in development and led by the Red Cross, and I think we should use them to guide our giving every single day. So to explain them simply, humanity principle is that everyone needs to be treated humanely and equally, and that suffering must be treated where it's found. Neutrality means support must be given in an impartial and an independent manner. Impartiality speaks to non-discrimination. You cannot discriminate when people are suffering on the basis of nationality, race, gender, religion, political considerations, any other discriminatory reasons, ethnicity, no discrimination. And the independence principle talks to autonomy from the political and economic system. Key principles that we did not see in operation in Australia during the bushfires. Key principles that we need to think about as we talk about COVID and working with our neighbours in faraway places. I really believe we've got to somehow just cut through the noise and the fear about what's going on and show people that our humanitarian task is not a zero-sum game. We need to talk about the greatness that we find in the low and the middle income countries. These extraordinary people, I get to work with heroes every single day. Hundreds and hundreds of people on my team from developing countries that are amazing. They're our neighbours and they need our help. We need to tell the story of their greatness, and we also need to tell the story of why, until we do help them to deal with inequity, to deal with the human rights impact of climate change, to deal with COVID, our world's not going to be safe. We're not going to be safe until everyone is safe. Now, I just want to talk a little bit about that theming around the mobilisation of the corporate sector and where the corporate sector fits in. So if you could flick me onto that, that's great. Coming back to that theme of magnificence, I believe I'm incredibly hopeful, and it's because I get to work with amazing people every day who just lift me and inspire me. And I truly believe that this period in human history is going to be defined by the magnificence of humankind, not the malevolence of humankind. I believe we can, and I believe we will make huge strides to making our world fairer, more equal, and greener. And I think business is playing a really significant role in that already. So when you think about leaders around the globe and what we're starting to see, how many leaders are asking themselves how they stand on the right side of history and what their best use is. And I believe the private sector is really starting to lead here. SDG 17, which is one of my favorite SDGs, is Partnership for the Goals. And I really love that idea because I believe that if we want to solve the world's biggest problems, we need all arms of society, including business, to work together. We can't solve these problems on our own. I also think society worldwide is giving us permission as business leaders to do just that. So if you look at the recent Edelman Trust Barometer, for instance, it found that 78% of Australians believe that CEOs should hold themselves accountable to the public and not just their board of directors or their shareholders. What an amazing change in attitude. We're seeing this enormous mobilization for ethical purpose business and how that's becoming mainstream. And the bushfires are a case in point. So, as many of you know, we lived through the most horrendous catastrophe at the end of 2020. In fact, where I live down here, I'm looking out at the trees right now. 6 of my dear friends lost their home down here, we survived through 3 evacuations. Climate change writ large and real to us. It was terrifying. And what we saw during that period is Australian corporates digging incredibly deep to support relief efforts on top of their usual contributions. So through the bushfires, the top 50 corporate donors gave away 1.1 billion to philanthropic causes in 2020. That was up 17% from the previous year. How fantastically hopeful is that? And not just giving in a traditional form. There are some amazing models out there of business leading the way and creating change for our world, which is so desperately needed. So I give you examples of that. The 1% pledge, led by Salesforce, Atlassian, brought into Australia, companies pledging 1% of their equity, time, product profits. BlackRock, world's largest investment manager, leading the way against fossil fuels as an investment. We look at the UN Global Compact, the world's largest and most prestigious sustainability initiative for corporates. It's been a revolution. I mean, for me, 23 years ago when I started Adara and said, I'm going to run a business to fund and serve people in poverty, people thought I was a crazy, or they might have been right about that, or a drug dealer or a money launderer. But here we are now, where these kind of concepts and this kind of innovation is mainstream. How wonderful is that? So just to turn you to Adara for one quick second in terms of what Adara actually looks like and our version of this model. Can you flick me there? Yeah. So the backstory to Adara is that I'd been lucky enough. I'm a social activist who found her way into business and power to learn. And I was lucky enough to be a service provider to balance sheets as a lawyer, then to run one as a CEO of a publicly traded bank. And while I was having that experience across all those different worlds, I spent my days thinking about asset liability management. And that thinking brought me to a bit of a light bulb moment that there was a different model that we could use to create and generate and harness wealth, power, and capital for those in huge need. When I looked at the not-for-profit sector with my business eyes, I saw this terrible mismatch for so many great not-for-profits. These sort of short-term capricious donors matched against or not matched against these really long-term responsibilities to clients, especially when you're working in human social service delivery. So I set up Adara very simply with the idea that I could build an investment banking corporate advice business as a funding engine to fund the work of a great international development organization that I set up at the same time. So our businesses are there. They are solely for purpose. There's now 2 of them. And their job is to advise on mergers and acquisitions. We advise some of the largest companies in Australia, and I have 15 of the most famous investment bankers in Australia who work for us leading mandates for no recompense, with my team sitting to support them and to support our clients, and all the fees they make go to our work with people in poverty. So we truly are bridging worlds, if you like, from Wall Street to Back Street. We've now put about $55 million to our work. About 18 of that's come from our businesses, and I'm enormously proud of that. I wish it was 10 times that amount, but we're only just getting started. Our focus is in 2 areas. We're specialists in care to preterms and low birth weight babies, maternal newborn health. Our most remote project is 25 days walk from the nearest road right up on the Nepali-Tibetan border. So the way we think about what we do is we impact countless people, hundreds of thousands of people every year through our service delivery. We influence policymakers and key actors through our knowledge sharing and our networks, and we really try hard to inspire others to make change, which is why I'm standing here on this virtual stage today. I have huge hope for what the Adara model can become. Watch out Wall Street. That's where you're going to see us next, I hope. So I just want to move on and talk a little bit, if you can roll me into systems change. Now, one of the things that's been very interesting in this wonderful 23 years is I've had this really interesting viewpoint of seeing the sector as both a philanthropist and as an implementer. And at that cross section, I'm starting to see this trend emerge that many of you will know about, that focuses on systems change and the need to solve really complex problems. We're seeing this in Australia too. Foundations across the world showing an interest in moving away from the status quo towards a sort of more systemic and emergent way, if you like, of creating change. And organisations wanting more from their investment, looking to maximise impact by funding systems change. And so that's a shift to long-term thinking and grant making, which is terrific. But while that is terrific and amazing, I just want to mark that it's really vital that we continue providing immediate support while we are at the same time affecting long-term change. You know, to take an old cliche, you can't hand someone a fishing net when they're starving. We need immediate projects to meet immediate needs, to save life, while we also look to create long-term solutions. So my message on this is not a binary. It's not an either-or situation. We need both. We need donors to invest in service delivery, advocacy, policy, knowledge sharing, all of it matters. So I guess what I'm saying is, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater in our rush to make change and to move with the newest trends. So if you move me on to the road ahead, my final sort of thoughts and threads, you know, there's a winding road ahead of us. I really believe that philanthropy can play a unique role in global change because we have, as philanthropists, we have flexibility that many players in the sector don't have. We have the ability to fund and do things that others can't or others won't. Philanthropists are the world's first risk takers. We are unconstrained by politics, by popular opinion. That gives us the incredible power to lead. We need to do that. We need to do that in a way that's informed by those we wish to support. I'm very much a supporter of the decolonisation of aid movement. We need to do that with the highest levels of integrity, and we need to do it in partnership with each other. We need to reach out our hands and find all the key players, the key actors in our global systems, and stand together with them. And philanthropy to me goes from the ordinary women and men who don't want to wait to hear about the government's latest stance on international aid before they give money to a disaster, all the way through to those who make a living trying to fill gaps, meet unmet needs, you know, whether it's environmental, whether it's the arts, whether it's human rights. There's such a span. As I said at the beginning, I really do think this is the most important decade, certainly that I'm going to live through. It's not just a time for conversation and theory, it's a time for action. I just loved Greta Thunberg and her blah, blah, blah. She is so right. This is a time for leadership. And I'm holding on to this hope that that's what we're going to do for the sake of all the people who need it the most, just like Marvin, Martin and Mildred did all those years ago. So if you bring me back to them for a second, I just want to take you back as I end to Martin, Marvin and Mildred. There they are. They're Adara legends. They're now 16. They're thriving. One of them wants to be a pilot. The other two want to be doctors. And their story is one of millions, hundreds of tens of millions, hundreds of millions, but it's a symbolic example for me of the impact that can be made when people stand together to make change, which is what I know we're all trying to do today. And they and thousands of others, tens of thousands of others like them, are why I do what I do every single day. So the way I see our work at Adara Group, the way I see philanthropy and all its beautiful diversity is that it's a stitch, right, in a tapestry of beautiful tapestry that creative and visionary and courageous leaders in business and international development in our communities, in our countries, it's a tapestry that we're weaving, you know, from one part of the world to the other to make our world a better place. So if you flick me on to kind of the way ahead, I think you're going to go one slide back from them. There we go, the road ahead. Let's just finish with this. I was trying to think of a way to sum up the message that I want to give you today. Thank you for including me in this conversation. And I was thinking that maybe the best way I can sum this up is to take a passage out of the Chinese Book of Wisdom, the Tao. And let me leave you with that, and give you an English version of that. I think this has informed the way that I think about what we all do. It goes something like this: if you fill your cup to the brim, it will overspill. If you sharpen your knife too much, it will blunt. If you chase after money and power, your heart will never unclench. If you worry about what people think about you, you will forever be their prisoner. Just do the work and step back. That is the path to serenity. Thank you.
Wow, that was really inspiring. Thank you, Audette. And also for sharing your wonderfully kind of pragmatic views to help us reflect on poverty, particularly with our neighbours and what we could and should do to help. I found it personally very useful to be reminded about the inequality that exists, and the reminder that this is the decade for action and leadership. So thank you so much for reminding us all about those wonderful sort of humanitarian principles, and that we're all capable of doing more to help, and be reminded of some of those key facts that you presented us with, that when you hear it come from you feels quite confronting, but it also is a wonderful reminder that I think we all need. So thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure, Jo. Great to be with you all.
Thank you very much.